Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. Welcome back to the eUniversity Day 2. We hope you had a productive first day yesterday, thinking how to be ready to move into implementation, and also meeting funders, engaging in the deep dives and the fireside talk. We heard from Ian Graham about getting ready for implementation, and that film that you watched is now available on URBACT YouTube. And we can see from the mirror boards, the networks made progress. Reconnect filled out the action table together. URBACT and URBSecurity did a risk analysis with the iPESL tool. And we saw that Kairos mapped the enablers and barriers of their integrated action plans. Feedback from the afternoon sessions is also good. And if you missed them, here's a summary coming up, and you'll be able to watch the replays soon. In the fireside talk, there was a discussion on innovation and governance, and also about different ways of framing public-private partnerships and what the role of the local administration is in all that. What was clear is that actually the sustainability of the URBACT local group is around making sure that inclusive decision-making is embedded in forward governance structures. People seemed really inspired, especially by the City of Cork, their story on the city centre strategy, and also the Public Innovation Lab from Cluj in Romania. The deep dive on monitoring and evaluation was well attended with over 160 people. And midway through, after the first introduction, there was a quiz on indicators, and most participants got the answers correct. So Bela must be doing something right. He's really good at explaining and taking us through that evaluation framework, monitoring framework. There was also some discussion about some of the common pitfalls and how to create an evaluation framework linked to your action plan. In the Meet the Funder sessions on cohesion policy and EU funds, Adele and Broom from the Secretariat introduced the new funding guide and the new national funding sheets, which are coming up from URBACT. The participants tested these on, we have a mirror board with it all on, and that was a positive response, although there was a request for a PDF version from the Miro haters, and we understand there are a few still Miro haters out there. We'll provide that in PDF too. And it was agreed this is a really useful resource to be able to put everything, lots of different funding sources in one place. The national funding sheets had a really positive response. It's felt this is something really needed in cities, and we also got some really good ideas about how to improve them with extra information. The Interact presentation was about the cross-border cooperation programs and Interreg, and that provided quite a different perspective, and these are perhaps some untapped potentials in these funding streams. So keep your eyes open for URBACT sharing those documents and the national funding sheets so that you can make the most of them all. And you could also join the national sessions tomorrow, where there'll be more information about some of that. Then finally, in the Meet the Funder session with the European Investment Bank, Jerry Muscat presented different types of loans that cities of more than 75,000 inhabitants can apply for. Those cities can get in touch with the European Investment Bank branches in their country, and you can apply anytime. Jerry also talked about what makes a good application, things like the importance of the integrated approach to a project, which should be completely natural for URBACT networks, of course, and with a special focus on climate and carbon neutrality. In order for cities to have a good understanding of what they called sustainable finance taxonomy, so that the sort of language and structure of these loans, it's good to identify a person at local level who's aware of the project and the investment and finance needed, who could then become a contact person for the European Investment Bank. The bank can provide support to candidate cities before submission of proposals and during the implementation phase. So URBACT will continue to follow up on this and help any cities that want with connections to the European Investment Bank. So moving on to the programme today, we're going to shift the focus to developing funding strategies. We're going to have the same format, working in the morning from 10 to 12, and then from 10 to 11 here in the studio, we've got the live session with the pre-recorded talk and some discussion with the speaker and with a city with direct experience. Then from 11 to 12, you'll work in your network groups in Hopin again with the Mira board and try out some of the tools related to funding strategy. After lunch this afternoon, from 2 to 4, there are several optional sessions for you, similar to yesterday, office hours from the speaker, deep dive sessions, and some Meet the Funder sessions. I'll give you more details about those later before we wrap up this morning. Anyway, today let's move on to this focus on funding strategy. We're now going to listen to a short film with Regina Trenkler-Fraser, who is an expert who's been creating new resources for our cities.
Hi everyone, my name is Regina Trenkler-Fraser, and over the next 15 minutes I will be talking about funding strategies. This talk is part of the URBACT capacity building for cities to help them seek investment for implementing their sustainable local action plans. I will explain why funding strategies are relevant and important for cities with local action plans. I will introduce a potential structure of a funding strategy to you, and I will also explain some of the chapters in more detail. What is a funding strategy? A funding strategy is a means to accomplish the search and access to funding for activities which you like to implement, and to organize this well and in an efficient and effective manner. A funding strategy is an integral part of an implementation plan for an organization. It is also part of a business plan for an enterprise, and it should certainly be part of an integrated action plan. A funding strategy will put you in the position to know where to apply for funding in the first place. When developing a funding strategy, you need to think through every step of the approach to resourcing and funding of your activities. For this, you need to be clear about what it is you want funding for, how much funding you need, when you need the funding, and you also need to know what your skills are in this area. So, why is a funding strategy important? In short, a well-developed and effectively implemented funding strategy will help you to become more aware about the whole funding process. It will make you more alert about funding opportunities. It will make you more creative about thinking about alternatives and options to funding. And it will make you more efficient in planning for your funding. But most of all, it will put you and your city in the position of being able to increase your financial means to implement activities and projects for your community and to create positive change. When thinking about putting an action plan into action, a lot of questions will present themselves to you. And this is not only about how much funding do we need. It is where will we find funding? Where should we be looking for? What are the skills required which we need to address those funding issues? Would there be alternative methods and techniques suitable for us? Which are the most suitable funding sources for our actions? And how will we coordinate this whole process? And what do we do when a funding application fails? A funding strategy will provide you the answers for all these questions. I will now show you what a funding strategy looks like and what chapters it might include. Depending on the size and complexity of your action plan, your funding strategy would contain a number of different chapters. Naturally, you would start with an informative summary of your action plan. Here you would describe the key themes and topics, the target groups, the anticipated results, to give appropriate context for your funding searches. This would be followed by a chapter on coordination. Coordination of all your resourcing and funding activities. In this chapter, I would outline, for example, the roles and responsibilities of staff. I would also outline a governance structure about meetings of the funding team or the funding officer with his or her colleagues. There should also be a description about some of the communication avenues, because it is particularly important that the funding team communicates well with those people who write the action plan, or the project managers and project designers. And I would also specify some of the reporting procedures. So it is important for you to know what skills and structures and procedures you already have in your city administration, and to decide what will be appropriate for your city to establish with regard to the size and complexity of your action plan and how this relates to your existing capabilities and processes. I would recommend to you to start with a skills and assets check, so that you are completely aware and knowledgeable about what processes and procedures and capabilities are already existing in your organization. The chapter on coordination would most likely be followed by a chapter on the timeline of your action plan. This is really to provide a general orientation and also the sequencing of your projects. And naturally, of course, this is connecting to when you will need to look for funding. This would be followed most likely by a chapter on financial scope. And here I would recommend to describe the type of projects you're planning in your action plan, because that determines what type of funding you need. Also, I would comment on if you need funding at all for certain projects or part of projects. Some of your action plans will already include a table on the financial scope and overview of your projects. So this will be a very useful starting point for you to write this chapter. When it really comes to the question where the funding will be coming from and where to look for funding, the chapter on the funders map and relevant resources and procedures will be the right places to describe your actions and your planned processes and procedures. A funders map is a tool, such as an Excel spreadsheet or a database, which I personally would start to create very early on in my action planning process, so that I can keep a close watch over the developments and opportunities out there in the funding environment. At the early stages, the funders map would include the most obvious funding sources in line with the themes and topics of the action plan. But the further you develop your action plan and refine project activities, the more you can refine also the funders map. And you can add more funders specifically to the requirements of your projects. It contains all the relevant contacts and relevant information in line with your action planning themes and topics. The funders map is a tool with which you will gain substantial insight into the funding environment, about the developments and the opportunities. So you will be alert of them and aware of them in good time to react. But of course, you will need to keep it up to date. Therefore, designing a number of key procedures is essential. Another hugely important topic is communication. And each funding strategy should have a chapter on communication included. In here, you need to Outline all your processes and procedures relating to which funders you need to communicate with, who would do the communication, and if you have the right skills available to do this task effectively. Alternatively, you might want to link this chapter to an already existing communication strategy of your action plan. But please be mindful of the fact to include then some dedicated communication tasks for the funding strategy so that you ensure that this task is delivered effectively and well. I also would like to draw your attention to the chapter on funding mixes and option appraisal. This chapter really addresses a stage where you have already identified a number of avenues for your project to be funded by. And you will need to make a decision now of which of the funding sources to go with. There are often a number of options available and sometimes also required by funders. For example, match funding. When you go for ERDF or ESF mainstream funding through your operational programs, in most cases, in most member states, the European funding needs to be matched with domestic or local public sector funding. So immediately you have two funding streams. Then there can be eligibility issues with some of the funders. Some parts of your projects might be eligible for one funding stream and another part might not qualify. So you need another funding stream to address this. Other funders might have an issue with the applicant. So they don't want the city to be the applicant, but prefer a community organization to be in the lead. So you need to adjust for this. And many funders will tell you that they love to have for you to have a multi-funding scenario. But be mindful, because the more funders you have within one project, the more applications you have to write. The timing is often an issue with their calls. But also, once you are successful, you have to address different reporting and monitoring procedures for each of the funders. So there might be challenges the bigger the funding landscape becomes for your individual project. Identifying these options and different combinations and appraising them together with your colleagues will help you to create more clarity about the decision you will have to make. And finally, the last chapter will be dealing with the processes of reviewing and adapting your funding strategy over time. As mentioned earlier, a funding strategy is a live document. Change is inevitable. But to think it through and help you adjust, the URBACT Toolbox will provide you with a good template and questionnaires to help you along. Based on 30 years experience, my recommendations to you are: develop your funding strategy as early as possible. Don't be shy in thinking, talking, and asking about funding. Develop and align your action plan as close as you can to current policy and funding strategies and priorities. It will help you very much in accessing funding. Draw your funders map also as early as possible and keep it up to date, that you stay alert about forthcoming opportunities. Do an inventory of skills within your organization. Be aware of what your assets are and use them effectively. Communicate well, particularly with your funders, with your local politicians and decision makers, with your budget committees. Let them know about your action plan. Attract them, make them interested in your action plan. Learn about your funding options and alternatives. Assess them with a flexible mindset for the benefit of your action plan. But most importantly, think creatively and collaborate. Well, that's all from me for the moment. Thank you so much for your attention.
Now I'm happy to welcome Regina here in the studio. Hi, Regina, how are you?
Good morning, Sally.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So great film, lots of advice and information in that film as well. Let's start by going backwards a little bit, because in fact you were involved in an URBACT study some time ago, which has been the impetus for a lot of this work and in fact this e-university to develop better the resources on funding strategy. So can you tell us a bit about that study, which followed up the action planning networks from a previous cohort? Tell us what the main findings were and what the challenges were for cities who wanted to move into implementation.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. It was a very interesting study about 2 years ago. And the main question was, 2 years after the networks have stopped working together, to see how the individual cities progressed with implementing their action plans. And we received responses from 102 cities, so it was a good response, high response rate, which was great. And the results were really very encouraging because they progressed really very well. 85% of the whole respondent cities had progressed substantially in their implementation. But nevertheless, we asked for if there were any issues and challenges. And usually over 50%, over half of those respondents identified a number of issues. And there were 4 which I would like to mention in particular. One was that by the time the action plan was completed, policies and funding programs and priorities had changed. So it must have been that they waited until the action plan was actually completed and then realized, wow, we can't, or it's difficult to find funding for our projects. Another challenge was that local politicians, departments, decision makers were sort of not collaborative enough and not supportive enough. Others reported that funders were just not interested. So again, there was a slight mismatch of what they wanted funding for and what funders were looking for. And in many cases also there were not funding issues, staff issues, timing, no time available, no staff available, or staff with the knowledge of writing funding applications or looking for funding moved on. So all of those findings and challenges prompted the Secretariat, as you said, to look into this and see how URBACT can support cities better in particularly this area. And so we, Christina Caristelli and myself, we developed a new tool set with lots of different areas and guides and tools and templates for cities to help them in many different aspects of funding and resourcing.
Great. So we'll talk a bit more about those new tools shortly. And I think those barriers that you talked about, they're really useful for us as a programme to understand better what gets in the way of implementing an action plan. You mentioned political support, and just to say we're going to have a deep dive tomorrow afternoon on ways in which cities can sort of create a fertile environment for their plan and making sure that politicians are on board, that people know about their project coming up. So that's a good one to be tackled tomorrow. But just coming back to the study again, can you tell us how many cities had actually gone into implementation, how many had got money, and where had they got that money from?
Well, as we said, 85% started implementing, so they found money. And there were the remaining 15% were in the process of starting to look for funding or hadn't started. Some cities did not progress with implementation, that must be said, but it's a minority. It was just maybe 5 cities all in all. And when we asked what kind of sources the cities used, it was, in the majority of cases, it was local, regional, national funding, which of course, there are local action plans, so it makes sense to use local resources and regional resources to do this. But in addition as well, European Regional Fund and the European Social Fund, through the operational programs, but also through the Cohesion Policy Fund, were used by a good half of those respondents. So they were very active in that area too. And whilst the spread was much wider than this, so we also had cities who applied and were successful in drawing down funding from Erasmus and from Interreg and Horizon 2020 at the time. And there were a number of programs, but it reduced in number then, But the spread was there, so lots of potential to build on this experience and increase, hopefully, this aspect of using European funds as well.
Yeah, again, really good intelligence for us to know about that spread, to help people identify the right funding stream for their action plan. And that's the benefit of what you were talking about, having this funding matrix, so you can keep an eye on all of these different funds that might be right for you. And it seems have been right in the past for URBACT networks and URBACT cities. So let's talk a bit more about the tools. I think, and the Z card, hopefully participants in the e-university have received in their postal present a Z card. And this, I think, Regina, can you tell us a bit more about what's in here and how this is a preview of the tools that are coming up that have been developed?
Yes, happy to. We were very excited, Christina and I, when we saw it, because, as I said before, we developed tools and guides over a whole area of funding and resourcing themes and topics, and there's quite a lot in there. So there's not only funding strategies, but it's also how to project design, how to cost a project, how to write a good funding application. It's all connected. And when we thought about these connectivities between those themes, we had the idea of presenting it, illustrating it in the form of a metro line map. So each line presents one of the key themes in funding and resourcing, and the various stops along each line provide access to guides and tools in a particular task. Or let's say in the funding strategy line, you have all the chapters covered, and these chapter headings give you advice on how to fill in the chapters, what to address, and templates and tools really to accomplish this. And this, I will explain a little bit more about this map later on in the deep dive session on project costing together with Christina. But in any case, you have it in your pack. You should have it in front of you or near you, and you can see and familiarize yourself a little bit with the various topics, because eventually, not long in spring, they will all be available on the URBACT webpage.
That's right. They're going into the URBACT toolbox. I think we're going to double the number of tools in the URBACT toolbox, because there's a lot there, and it's really helpful to have all of the stages of a funding strategy and bidding. We're excited about this coming up. So that was kind of a preview there. Last question for you for now, Regina, which is a bit about the timeliness of this current action planning networks getting finished with their plans. And you said, in fact, in the study, there was some mismatch in the timing of having a plan finished and the calls being open or funds available. And we're kind of hoping that this is the opposite is going to happen with this group of networks, because it does seem that this is the moment when a lot of the European funds in particular will be opening their first calls. We're at the beginning of a new program period. We've been hearing about calls starting to open already. So do you think it's a good moment to be going for, in particular, European funds?
Of course, it's a perfect timing. And by all means, start as early as you can to align your action plan themes and topics with those programs and calls coming up, and see where there is a good match for your projects to go ahead. What was interesting also in the follow-up study, and indeed the final questionnaires and completion surveys you have to write as a network city by the end of networking. We've done a reflection on those as well, and what came out was very clearly that cities started early with implementing their projects and looking for funding for projects. So even whilst networking and writing the action plan for those projects who were already quite well designed and conceptualized, cities went ahead. So don't lose time. It's a competitive environment out there. It's no worries to take the risk of losing some applications, but you learn through this, and it's a new program period. You have 7 years.
Yeah, that's true. And I think we already heard in this morning and yesterday from funders, get in touch. Don't be shy. Get in touch with
Yes,
funders.
absolutely.
It's already, the doors are starting to open. So
communicate,
push on those
talk,
doors. Yeah.
and all of this. Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely.
Good. Just a reminder also that this afternoon we have 2 funding sessions, one with Horizon Europe and the other one with the European Urban Initiative. So 2 that are going to be opening their calls soon. Come along this afternoon and talk to them directly. And tomorrow we'll hear more about the European Social Fund and the European Regional Development Fund. Mm-hmm. So now it's time to talk to a city about their direct experience. I'm now going to bring in Maria Giovanna Zambrolini from the municipality of Schaerbeek here in Brussels. Welcome, Giovanna, and thanks for joining us live. Because it's Brussels, Giovanna's been able to come down the road and join us live. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I think, Giovanna, you've been part of a previous URBACT network. You understand a bit about URBACT networking too.
Yes, we have been a member of the URBACT transfer network, making spend matter on public procurement.
Perfect. Great. So, Giovanna, could you start by telling us basically what your job is and how it sits in the department and the structure of the local administration and how that works, how the way you accompany staff in this kind of funding task?
Yes, so first of all, also thank you very much for inviting me on behalf of Schaerbeek. A few words about my city. It's one of the 19 municipalities located in Brussels capital region. It is about 135,000 inhabitants with a high diversity, and it is located in the northeast of the region, actually just behind the EU quarter. In the municipality, there are 1,800 employees, and we are organized around 8 directorates. I am working for the Service of European and International Programs, which is integrated in the well-established Department of Grants and Partnership in the Directorate of Sustainable and Strategic Development. We are actually the founding team, as Regina called. We work around 2 main axes. One is national and regional funds, the other are Europeans. We, all the team of us, work on a specific aspect of manage of grants, project development, as well as capacity building for our colleagues, especially about grant management, innovation learning, as well as managing transversal projects that involve teams of many different services. I can say that globally we work on with the same method, but we have our specificity. For the national, mainly the team work on capital spending, while for the European project, it's more about pilot projects and exchange of best practice, because on one side we try to respond to needs that are immediate, on the other maybe on needs that need to be addressed on the medium and short term.
Okay, great. Now, tell us about your funding strategy. I think you have got a strategy, so tell us a bit about that.
Indeed, we have strategies that it's one mostly related to the national part and the other one on European funding. The second one is actually been just adopted, and as also Regina recalled, these are live documents, so they need to be updated from time to time. I would focus more on the European part, and here we have developed a strategy on around 4 axes. One is raising awareness and sensibilization for the administration as well as for our political body. The second one is around networking, visibility outside of our city. The third is about capacity building, supporting our services and our colleagues in recalling and replying to call for tenders. And the last, but not least, is monitoring. So looking for actively for call for tenders, replying to consortium that might reach through us.
So that's really interesting structure you've got there, which helps organize the strategy. So tell us, do you also have some tools which drive the strategy as well?
Yes, I can mention that around the axis of raising awareness internally, we have built up a newsletter. So this is an internal tool that we use to reach out the different services of the administration, as well as some associations. And in this newsletter, we include news such as information about ongoing projects, as well as call for tenders that are upcoming in the future. For the national side, I would like to recall a training that has been adopted now, and it is available for all municipalities in Brussels Capital Region. So to better manage grants. And this has been initiated by Schaerbeek municipality and also Anderlecht, which is one of the other 19 municipalities of Brussels.
So you're using things like a newsletter to raise awareness and training for staff to be able to drive the funding strategy themselves as well. That's great. Can you give us any examples of success? It's always good to have some practical examples. What have you managed to do to bring in funds?
Of course, we have several, and here I would like to focus on two. So again, on the national side, an example of capital, so infrastructure building, a school that is called Van Oost. It is about 600 pupils that receive courses in both Dutch and French, as actual Brussels is a bilingual region. And this project for 20 million has been financed by both the Dutch and the French community. On the European side, there is the example of the first project that we had in-house from Interreg program back in 2011-12. Thanks to this project, exchange of practice around climate change, we were able to integrate with time a new policy, public policy, which has given birth to our climate action plan.
So that's a great example how European some of the softer programs on exchange and learning can lead to better policy development inside the municipality itself.
Indeed.
So that's great to hear. And finally, could you tell us a bit about what you heard that Regina talked about that you think is, you listened to the film and you've been listening to Regina, are there things that you think are particularly resonant for you or that you could learn from or that you're already doing?
Yeah, well, we cannot but agree with Regina's message that having a funding strategy would definitely help and is helping us to become more alert, creative, effective, efficient about creating positive change and increasing the number of funding available in our city. We have seen that both for our national and European axis, having a strategy has helped us to make an assessment of the current status of skills which are available in our administration, also to give ambitions in terms of projects, budget that we would like to get, as well as tools that are needed to get there, and make an assessment and identify potential stakeholders.
Great.
In particular, we have worked in 2021 with an external consultant that has helped us to focus on two aspects that Regina mentions, which is on one side the financial scope, identifying topics and ideas of projects that are matching both the local and European priorities, as well as the funder maps. So we have identified for the different topics and the project potential grants and subsidies that could help us to build the project.
So interesting, lots of things actually, lots of parallels and similar actions. And I think it's really interesting the way you've brought in external expertise. We've talked about that over the last couple of days. Sometimes a city needs to bring in outside help to do these things. And also this idea that you're looking inside the municipality for projects and ideas and matching them, helping to do that matching with what potential funding streams are out there. It sounds great. Congratulations from me. I also wanted to bring in Regina again at this point and say, Regina, you've been listening here to Giovanna. What's your reaction to this, and what do you think constitutes good practice from Schaerbeek?
Well, it's wonderful news to hear that Schaerbeek is doing so well and establishing these kind of whole department and services for funding and grant officers and funding experts. You know, this really is ever so helpful for a city to really make progress in attracting more and more funds and doing more things, doing more projects. So that's really great to hear. Wonderful, and many cities out there will be very jealous to hear it. But I would be interested, because I know that many cities or smaller cities might not be at this stage yet, you know. And how could you tell them maybe a little bit, or give them an insight how you got there from before you had funding department funding strategy falls out of that, you know, but to convince your decision makers of that you need this. You know, because this is often the problem. That we don't need it, you know, we have enough funding or something like this. But how did you manage this? That is often the key.
Indeed, Regina, I think this is a journey. That's what we have experienced in the last 10 years. The main challenge, as you mentioned, one is definitely to gain a political commitment toward having a dedicated staff to look for these opportunities. And the other main challenge is also to gain all from project designer and managers that could help to build up such a project, understanding all the process of applying to different grants. So the journey for us started with this project that I mentioned from Interreg, so already 10 years ago. And thanks to this first experience, different people from the administration and from the political board could really see being involved the added value of these opportunities. And thanks to the dedication also of the people involved in these first steps, it was possible to get to the point of engaging a profile, someone that is specifically dedicated to looking for fundings. And after this, set up a concrete and general funding strategy.
Great. Well, thank you. It just points out the importance of communicating once you have a project, to really let people know about it and bring your decision makers, politicians into this, you know, and just talk about it. Don't just work away.
I think it's also that you need to invest in order to get a return. So that, you know, investing in a team like you and in the skills, by the capacity building, investing in the skills of your staff, you're more likely to get some return on that investment and bring in more resources as a result. And I also think it's interesting what you said about the Interreg was kind of one of the first results that created this mindset, or this idea that it's good to have this unit. And I often think that URBACT actually acts in this way too, that cities who are involved in URBACT, although it's not huge amounts of money, it creates this kind of openness, it creates a sustainable and robust plan for funding, and maybe also a motivation and an understanding amongst other stakeholders, including politicians, who think, yes, we need to do this more, we see what we're learning from this, and it can take us on to have better defined plans for bigger investments in future. I mean, do you have a view on that, either of you?
Absolutely. It has been seen in studies before for URBACT, you know, where we talk to cities and ask them about the benefits they experience through URBACT. And many cities reported, yes, it's this introduction into a wider field of funding opportunities, learning from good practice. And now it's kind of going further into these sort of funding and resourcing avenues on focus on implementing projects on the ground. And yes, I can relate to that very well, what you said.
Yeah, there is this aspect of looking for European opportunities to respond to needs which are medium and long term. And now the challenges that cities are facing, like climate change, just to mention one, they are really looking for trying to go one step beyond what is the concrete need of today.
Mm-hmm. Having that longer term perspective is really key. Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you both so much. Thank you for these insights. Giovanna, I think you're going to be back with us this afternoon in a fireside talk on success in EU funds. What time is that happening?
Yes, it is happening at 2:00 online.
So more of Giovanna at 2:00 with other success stories if people want to come along to that. That sounds good. And Regina, you're going to be doing office hours. What time and where?
Office hours will start at 2:15, and you will find it in Expo.
In Expo?
In Expo.
Okay, so on the menu, click Expo, and Regina is very happy to talk to cities one-on-one, give customized advice, help people to understand the tools, etc.
Yes, please just drop in and ask a question. More than happy to assist. And before that, I will, of course, do the deep dive session on project costing with Christina, and I will be there just for 15 minutes and switch over.
Good.
But yes,
great offer,
wonderful program.
Great start to the day and great offer continuing this afternoon. Thanks so much. So now it's time to say hi again in the studio to the URBACT team for any inputs and questions that they have through Hopin and social media. So on board today we have Alexandra Kluczka again, the URBACT events officer, and we're introducing Hendrik van der Poel, who's capacity building intern. How are you both?
Hi, Sally. We're very well, thank you.
Cool.
Hey, Sally, we're great, thank you.
Hi, Alexandra. Hendrik, listen, your new face here on screen. You've been working for months now, I think, on the build-up to the e-University, and I think you've been also busy creating and fixing Miro boards. I don't know if you're a Miro hater by now or a Miro lover, but listen, how are you enjoying it so far? How has it been?
It's been great, Sally, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, very happy to help the URBACT team with the hard work from the organization of the e-University. It's very amazing to see how engaged all the participants are right now. We're looking at the chat constantly. There's a lot of questions being asked. There's one particular question from Severina, and I would like to ask it to Regina, who has a question about how smaller cities can go after these large funding opportunities with the limited resources that they actually have, and how they can compete with larger cities who have dedicated resources for funding applications.
Good question, Regina. Do you want to respond to that? Yeah, please do.
Excellent question, and a tricky one as well, but not an impossibility at all for small cities. You don't need a huge funding team necessarily. What you do need is time to look into the various availabilities of programs and fine-tune your project to what is available and what the funders are looking for. So the commitment to write funding applications and research the funding environment is key. But of course, if you can have a grants officer or funding officer, this is fantastic. But as Giovanna mentioned, they didn't start off with a big team. They started small. And and with a small city, if you only have a small action plan, of course, you only look for smaller funding opportunities. And in fact, there are lots of funders out there where the funding application is also less onerous. If you only want to have 5,000 euro, you only maybe have to write 5 pages to describe your project. If you want 500,000 euro, well, then it is a bit more complicated and a more complex process. But you can start small, absolutely.
Any more reflections in the chat? Or Alexandra, do you want to tell us about social media?
Absolutely. I'm happy to report that again, the hashtag eUniversity 2022 is trending. And thank you to all the networks, national URBACT points and individuals who have tweeted. Here you can see, for instance, I particularly loved the tweets from Kairos, Reconnect and Urban Energy Pact. Thank you so much for being also so creative in your communication, and I particularly particularly liked how you dived into showing how you were jumping to implementation, working on your Miro boards, taking print screens with your team. That really shows the URBACT spirit, even when we work online. So that's fantastic. And well, for all of you, we encourage you still to tweet with @URBACT #eUniversity2022. You have a chance to make it up there tomorrow. And I would also like to show you some features from our photo booth gallery, where we also encourage you to take pictures in the expo. I really love your creativity here, the different hats, the different angles, and I also love the wishes you have both for yourself and for your city. Here we can see that a lot of you really wish for yourself to grow, to develop, to continue evolving, and I think it really shows the spirit and mindset of URBACT people, and that's great to see. And also what you wish for your cities to be more democratic, more green, more friendly for the citizens, more accessible. So yeah, keep working and keep taking pictures. We will also feature some great ones tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra. I'm not sure if we saw the slide of the photo screen, but is there somewhere on Hopin we can see the photos? Is there a gallery that we can see on Hopin?
There is a gallery we saw on. There is the gallery on Hopin. At the moment, we didn't
now
enable
we see it. Thank you.
Great. At the moment, we didn't enable the feature for everybody to see. Also, to sort of for your privacy rights, in case you don't want to be out there. But well, it's something we can reflect on. But happy you can see it now. And at the end, we will definitely present a whole mosaic of your pictures.
Fantastic, thank you. Hendrik and Alexandra, anything else before we start to move to wrapping up?
No, thank you. This afternoon, if any further questions, you can always go to the deep dive sessions and also the office hours. And we keep our eyes on the chat if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and maybe a big thank you again to all the team that are behind the studio here today. We've got a big team here, the URBACT Secretariat and the events team doing a lot of work behind the scenes, so thanks so much for that. So it's time to start wrapping up on this morning's live session and to move on to the network exercises. These are the tools waiting for you on the Miro board. So we've given the option of working on a funders map and a funding mix appraisal. Those are both tools in the toolkit. I'd like to thank again Regina and Giovanna for your inputs this morning, and we'll see you later this afternoon, both of you in different ways. In terms of the programme for later today, here's a slide of it. Before we go, here's a reminder. We've got 2 o'clock, a deep dive on project costing. In that session, you can get a 360-degree view of the funding and resourcing metro map that Regina has been already shown you on screen. And also, you can test your knowledge with the project costing quiz. Who dare do that? Go along and join in. And that's going to be with Christina Kerasteli and also with Regina, both experts on funding and resourcing. In parallel, at 2 o'clock, there's going to be the fireside talk, success stories in EU funding, an inspirational conversation with municipalities who've creatively found their own ways to go after EU funding opportunities. And that's going to be facilitated by our URBACT programme expert, Marceline Bonneau, who I know is a colleague of Giovanna's, and she's bringing Giovanna into that conversation too. At 2:15, office hours with Regina in the Expo button. Then at 3 o'clock this afternoon, we've got 2 Meet the Funder sessions. The first is with Horizon Europe. They're going to be talking about research and funding opportunities for cities through Horizon Europe. And we have on board Marie Yeroyani, who's senior expert from Innovating Cities from the European Commission's DG Research and Innovation Unit. And also Ugo Guarnacci, who's a project advisor at the Research Executive Agency of the European Commission. So you'll hear it directly from the people who are really instrumental in running these programs. And in parallel with that, also at 3 o'clock, Meet the Funders, we have the European Urban Initiative, which is a newly repackaged initiative, which includes the innovative actions, I think. They're going to talk about what's in this for cities. And we have 3 colleagues from the European Commission, DG Regional and Urban Policy. They are Thomas de Bethune, who's the senior specialist, François Gaillaga, policy officer, and Laura Ligier, Policy Officer, who are well known to the URBACT team and work closely with us in URBACT. They're going to be able to tell you what's on offer for cities through the new initiative. So that looks to me like a really good choice on offer this afternoon, and quite hard to decide which one to go to. Enjoy that, and also be aware that all of these will be recorded, so you'll be able to get them on replay. But if you really want to get your questions in and participate, go along this afternoon. That's my advice. Just a quick reminder to reconnect tomorrow on Hop-In by 10 o'clock, please. And tomorrow we're going to be moving on to the next step, which is going to be funding at your fingertips. Securing support funds and resources, how to write a winning bid, all about the money this time. And we have an expert on board, Marion Cunier, who's really going to break down exactly the process you need to go through to write a really good funding application. So come join us for that tomorrow morning. For now, you need to click on the session area, same as you did yesterday. So look on the left-hand menu, the session button, find your network session, join your lead expert and partner to work together on your funding strategies related to your action plans. We wish you a fruitful morning, and we'll see you again later.